Hi, everyone. Welcome to Broadband Deployment News. The State of Arkansas Broadband Office has sent a letter to all of their RDOF recipients asking them to confirm that they are going to be deploying broadband using the award money that they're getting through RDOF, or do they anticipate defaulting or relinquishing that money? Be right back. Thanks for joining me. This is Broadband Deployment News. I'm Rick Usey with Zcorum. So I want to talk about this. This is important. And I talked a week or two ago about RDOF and some defaults. One default, a couple of defaults that have happened since the FCC and NTIA determined, I guess really the NTIA using the FCC data determined how much each states are getting. There have been two defaults since then. And there's also a push to allow other ISPs to default on RDOF since then, where that's due to basically the high cost now, or the significantly increased cost, let's say, of deploying broadband from back from when they actually won the money in the auction. So I linked in this video to the articles I'm going to look at today, as well as to that live stream that I did a few weeks ago about that push, again, from ISPs and ISP associations to allow these RDOF winners to relinquish some of those areas. And this is important now that we've got BEAD money coming out, because all those RDOF areas would be considered committed funds. So the areas on the broadband map would be considered served, even though they're not served right now, if there is a commitment for some service provider to use that money to build out broadband in that area. So this is a concern for states, because they need to know that as they decide which areas are unserved or underserved as they start the challenge process, they need to take into account areas that are going to be built with RDOF funds, and how sure are they about that. So that's why I wanted to cover this today, because I saw a couple of articles where this is relevant, specifically about Arkansas. So this first one I wanted to cover was actually just about the challenge process, because I think it does a great job of kind of summarizing the challenge process. This is in Arkansas's NPR, National Public Radio. It's an article there. So let me see here. Arkansas to begin identifying areas lacking broadband internet access. So this is talking specifically about the challenge process. You see here, federal officials are asking for Arkansas residents to help identifying which parts of the state still lack access to high-speed internet. Arkansas is receiving more than $1 billion from the Federal Broadband Equity Access and Deployment, or BEAD program, administered by the NTIA. Evan Feynman, director of the BEAD program, says the state first needs to identify which areas are currently lacking access. And I'm not sure where, there's some quotes from him in here, and I'm not sure if they were specific to Arkansas. I couldn't find anything. He did speak at a few things recently, but these are his comments. So every single home and business is on a map the FCC publishes, and the FCC's map shows whether those homes and businesses have broadband service or don't. The problem is the map's not always accurate, he said. What we're doing is offering folks the opportunity to challenge that map and make sure their home or business is properly categorized. So that is the next step. Once all the states have gotten in, I think they all had to get in by now, their initial proposals, volume 1 and 2, and Arkansas has their initial proposals in. The next step is to start the challenge process, and that's what he's referring to here. The state will soon enter the challenge process of the BEAD program, where city governments, nonprofits, and internet service providers will identify potential gaps in broadband service not already known to the federal government. Feynman says municipal governments, nonprofits, and internet service providers will be able to dispute the FCC's broadband coverage map through the challenge process. Once we know where we need service, the state will go to the private sector and say, here's the amount of money we have. We need y'all, maybe he was talking to Arkansas, we need y'all to come in and build these networks. Tell us where you want to build, where you won't, Feynman said. The state will have to problem solve for the areas that didn't get bids, and then they'll turn into us that list. So the states will turn to the list into the NTIA. Feynman says the goal is to offset some of the upfront costs of building broadband infrastructure and to make investment in rural areas more attractive to internet service providers. That is going to be a challenge, because there are going to be areas that ISPs are going to put bids in for, and there are going to be some expensive areas, maybe on the cusp, where they're really expensive but not extremely high cost, where they're going to say, this is just, we can't do it here. So it's going to be difficult for the states to cover all these areas. He says here, it costs about the same amount of money to string a mile of fiber in downtown Little Rock as it does to string a mile of fiber way out in very less dense rural areas. And obviously he was talking, I guess he was talking to probably NPR in Arkansas. The problem is that mile of fiber in Little Rock is going to get you a bunch of customers and revenue, and that mile of fiber out in rural parts of the state doesn't. And at some point, it costs more to build the fiber than you're going to get back from customers. Again, that's why it's difficult. You can get money to build out in these rural areas, but it's much more expensive to maintain because, again, in an urban area, you've got lots of customers. If you need to maintain the plant, go out and do some maintenance. It impacts lots of customers. You don't have to drive very far. Whereas if you're in a very rural area, you've got to drive a lot further. You're only fixing, a customer here and there, maybe a handful of customers as you do that maintenance. So it's very expensive to maintain. Feynman says Arkansas will begin accepting bids for broadband infrastructure projects after the challenge process is complete. It's estimated that more than 215,000 homes and businesses in Arkansas currently lack access to high-speed internet. BEAD program, created in 2021, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, is dedicating roughly $42.5 billion in federal funds to improving high-speed internet access nationwide. So again, Arkansas was given a little over $1 billion, and that was based on the FCC maps that we had. I believe it was the data as of June of 2023, which is currently the map that we have access to. And here in a couple of weeks or so, we should have the next map out, and that will be data as of December of 2023. So it'll be 6 months or so later, and there'll be some additional changes. Those will be changes from new broadband that was deployed during that area or during that time in those areas where it was not yet deployed as of June, as well as some challenges that took place. So the data is going to be even better, although the money that was allocated to Arkansas and other states was based on prior numbers. So during this challenge process, if there are areas that come up that turns out were not on the map and were on the map and are actually unserved, where it said served, Arkansas is not going to get any more money for those. And then more importantly, if there are RDOF areas that were committed on the map when the NTIA decided how much money they were going to provide to each state, if those RDOF locations were committed, and now let's say a provider in Arkansas that got RDOF money decides, you know what, we can't do it, we're going to default. We're going to pull out of this, even though they'll be fined for that, assuming the FCC doesn't have some method to let them relinquish that, then that's an additional area that the state of Arkansas is going to have to cover that they did not get funding for when the FCC looked at how many unserved locations there were throughout the country versus what was in Arkansas. That's how the NTIA divided up the money, was how many total unserved locations do we have in the country, how many are in Arkansas, and they're going to get a percentage based on the number of their unserved locations. So if they get a whole bunch more unserved locations, it just means they're going to have to find the money somehow to cover those as well. So that's about the challenge process. And again, that's why this is important as far as RDOF, and that's what this article talks about. RDOF defaulters hinder state BEAD programs. This is in Fierce Telecom. A lot of talk about how the RDOF program might make a mess of things with the BEAD program. That's because if a location is covered by an RDOF award, then it's ineligible for a BEAD grant. Unfortunately, many RDOF awardees have officially defaulted on their obligations to build fiber, or they just haven't made any progress in deploying the fiber. As a result, the locations that were supposed to be covered by RDOF could be left empty-handed. Now, prior to these two defaults that I talked about a few weeks ago, all the defaults that were done prior to the NTI determining how much each state would get. So there have been two defaults since then, very recently, and again, there could be more. And again, these associations and ISPs are pushing to have more, at least to have not defaults, but to allow them to relinquish this. And they were trying to get the FCC to make a decision about that quickly because of the challenge process, to try to get states to at least know, even though they won't get any more money for any RDOF locations that are relinquished, they will at least know prior to their challenge process being completed which areas actually will not have funding that they thought would because of RDOF. So on December 20th, 2023, the FCC said that it had completed all RDOF long-form application reviews, and it published a final list of 379 recipients with winning bids totaling more than $6 billion to be paid over 10 years. The FCC published this list after a lengthy process in which several high-profile recipients, such as SpaceX's Starlink, were denied funds, and in which numerous companies defaulted on their RDOF bids in certain locations. And that was SpaceX was a big one. They were one of the big winners that did not get money. Was it LTD Broadband, I think? And several others that were, LTD Broadband, I think that's who it was top number one as far as bids and winnings. And they did, right there, Starlink LTD. I see it right down here. That's another story. Made headlines for all the wrong reasons. So they were the number one winner, and they defaulted because in their case, it was just paperwork not getting in. They're supposed to, every RDOF winner has to be an ETC, which is an eligible telecommunications carrier, meaning that they have to provide data as well as voice services if they're going to build this network. And LTD broadband fell down in a couple different places there, and that was a big one for them. But even though the FCC has reviewed RDOF defaults and set fines, some RDOF recipients still may default. On March 4th, Arkansas State Broadband Director Glenn Howey sent a letter to all RDOF winners in his state. He asked them to confirm their commitments under RDOF or let the state know if they intended to surrender or default at any time in the future. Fierce Telecom spoke with Howey, who said he was being preemptive with his letter. He said, from a state broadband office perspective, and given the history of broadband grant programs in general, there are any number of variables that can impact and cause them not to complete their bills. And again, just the fact that, it was a little bit suspect on the RDOF auction in that I think there were some concerns about providers lowballing numbers so that they could get in there, maybe not being technically proficient to be able to do. And again, to do the service and provide the broadband, I think that, again, was a question of LTD broadband and some others. So that's one thing. But then also, this auction took place prior to the inflation that we've had the last couple of years. So this was all prior to the pandemic, prior to other factors that have boosted inflation in the last couple of years, and supply chain issues, all of that. So that has put, for those that had a reasonable bid in the auction, maybe now looking at it and going, you know what, this financially, economically doesn't make sense anymore. So that's a concern. And again, that's why these associations and ISPs have been pushing to the FCC to say, hey, let some of these folks that are struggling here because of the change in conditions relinquish their areas so that we know there's not going to be service before we get through this, before we get through the whole BEAD thing and the challenge process. Let's see, Brandy Reiter, Executive Director at the Colorado Broadband Office, said RDOF winners can default at any point during the period of performance. We're not going to be done with defaults until the program is finished, she said. And, there are milestones where they need to build out certain areas in certain time frames. So I guess it's possible that some folks could start building in the areas where it makes more sense, and other areas they're going to leave to last, and maybe those get defaulted. The FCC originally awarded RDOF funds to 7 awardees in Colorado for a total of $86.9 million, but already 2 awardees have defaulted. Originally, about 40,000 households were supposed to be connected via RDOF, and now that's down to 28,788 locations. And I think those defaults were prior to, again, the funds being allocated, the amount of funds being allocated to states, the amount that they would be getting. The 2 defaults that happened after that, one was in Virginia and one was in Alabama. Asked if she is concerned about RDOF defaults interfering with the BEAD program, Reiter said, yes, we're pretty concerned about it. She would like the federal agencies such as the FCC and the NTIA to address the RDOF defaults. I think the solution lies with the feds because the states can't do anything because these are federal programs. And one difference between RDOF and ARPA, let's say RDOF and USDA actually, and ARPA and the BEAD program is for RDOF. Those, again, that was a reverse auction, and those funds are being sent directly to the internet service providers that bid in that reverse auction, whereas ARPA and the BEAD program, that is money that's going to the state. The states are going to handle the sub-granting process to all the ISPs because it's a better way to do it. They know, they have a better idea of what the conditions are in the state, who the ISPs are in the state. They're closer to it, basically, than the federal government would be. So what she's saying here, I think, is that this really is, it's completely in control of the federal government because the states did not see this money. This money is being sent directly to the internet service providers. So pretty interesting. Again, the challenge process is going to be difficult for states, and just having this RDOF thing hanging over them is going to make it even harder because, again, they could be in the middle of this or after the challenge process and learning that somebody has defaulted on a substantial area, which now is not committed anymore. They don't have the money. Or I shouldn't say they don't have the money, but the money was not the area would not have been taken into account when they were assigned the money. They got to figure out how we're going to make it all work with the funds we have. And now we've got this big additional territory of unserved locations that we need to cover. So it's going to be difficult for them. So yeah, I can see why Glenn Howey sent that letter. And I would say it'd be a great idea for any other state to do that right now, to try to get commitments from those that have got RDOF. Or if those folks are thinking, if they already know, hey, we're not going to be able to do this, we haven't said anything yet, maybe to try to get them to, if they can't commit, to let them know, hey, there's a possibility that we may be defaulting or relinquishing these areas in the future. Thanks for joining me today. Hopefully this was interesting. If so, if you would give me a like on the video, I'd appreciate it. And then subscribe to our channel. You just do that by clicking the subscribe button down there on YouTube. And if you do that, click the bell and you'll be notified when I'm live. Thanks for joining me today. See you next time. Bye-bye.